The content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. Imagine a sprawling estate tucked away in the woods in Indiana, a quiet mansion with a long winding driveway. From the outside, it looks like a perfect place for a wealthy family to build their future. But inside, well, inside something sinister was happening. Something monstrous. For years, men vanished without a trace, young, vibrant, trusting. Their families searched, desperate for answers. And all the while, deep beneath this very property, in the shadow of the backyard, the truth lay hidden, fragmented, scattered, waiting to be unearthed. Herb Baumeister, a father, businessman, and a predator. A man who smiled in public but hunted in secret. A man whose home, Fox Hollow Farm, became a graveyard for the unsuspecting. But he wasn't the only one with a story to tell. Was Mark Goodyear a lucky escapee, or something more? How many victims were truly lost here? And will Fox Hollow Farm ever give up all its secrets? Tonight, we're going beyond the headlines. We're going to step into the walls of Fox Hollow Farm, and we ask, how much horror can one place hold? It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. I am your host, Winnie Schrader. And so many new true crime documentaries, docuseries have been coming out, and there's some that just make my skin crawl, but one that really stands out to me is the Fox Hollow Murders, Playground of a Serial Killer, which is a 4-part docuseries on Hulu right now. And it revisits the chilling case of Herb Baumeister. He was an Indiana businessman. He owned I think he called them Save-A-Lots. They were kind of like a Goodwill. But he was suspected of killing at least 23 men, during the time of the 1980s, 1990s, in that time area. But he targeted gay men. Now, and I guess he lured them back to Fox Hollow Farms, where he proceeded to have sexual encounters and then murder his victims. Now, my guest tonight, Richard Estep, he decided to take on the quest of writing a book about Fox Hollow Farm. It's The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm, Unraveling the History and Hauntings of a Serial Killer's Home, along with the current owner of Fox Hollow Farm, Robert Graves. Now, Richard has written many books. He is a paranormal investigator and paranormal author. He's written over 44 books, and many are more in the works. He's always writing new books. But he is also on his normal job as being an EMT. But yeah, he's been in the paranormal field. But they took this book to put together this new docuseries on Hulu. So I'd like to welcome Richard to the show. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Hey, Lenny, it's good to be back. Thanks.
Okay, so now how did you connect with the current owner of Fox Hollow Farm? Does he go by Rob Graves?
they kind of allude that as a joke in the book or in the docuseries, but does he go by Robert or Rob?
He goes by
Usually
both,
connect with him.
which,
Oh,
yeah,
does
it's
he?
I know it's pretty unfortunate. And a lot of people have asked when they see his name on the cover as a co-author, is that, is that a pseudonym? Is that a pen name? No, it's actually his name.
Yeah.
I had seen the case about 8 or 9 years ago. I'd seen the case on Ghost Adventures.
Okay.
And I think that, no disrespect to anyone involved with making that show, but you can't really cover something this complex in a 45-minute episode. So I
Right.
wanted to know more about it. And I reached out to Robert and said, hey, I would love to come, investigate this case and write about it, delve into it. And he agreed, and so the more time I spent looking into it, the more I thought this story needs to be told
Okay.
in print. And
Okay.
back then, there was one book available on the Baumeister murders called "Where the Bodies Are Buried,"
Okay.
which I didn't like, not least because there were no bodies buried at all. They weren't buried; they were scattered and crushed and damaged. So immediately, that kind of set me off on the wrong foot. And Rob knows a lot, like a lot about those murders. He's made it his kind of life's work to study them. And
Hmm.
so I'd wanted him to write the Baumeister crime aspect of the book. And he told me he flat didn't believe in ghosts. And so he said, you can do the paranormal investigation and write about that. And I'll do the murders, which is how the book ultimately happened.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting take. Yeah, because like I've said, I mean, true crime is part of the paranormal world because most paranormal haunted places, crime took place. So, and and that's a lot of things. People do use the paranormal to help kind of piece together some of these kind of cold cases and things like that. So I find it very interesting, especially with a place this saturated with such horror. I mean, having just bodies just are scattered throughout your whole property, that is just I can't even wrap my head around it. So okay, so you get together with Rob, started writing this book. Now, what things were you kind of shocked by as doing the research more on this property that you did not know going into it?
I think what bothered me most, and has until very recently, was how forgotten the whole case was. I mean, ultimately, I could care less if anyone ever says a word about Herb Baumeister again. But it bothered me that those poor men were essentially given up on, even identifying them. And I get that it was a Herculean task. The sheer number of bones and bone fragments, it's been said, were second only to the World Trade Center in terms of volume, needing to be
Yeah.
pieced together. And it's painstaking and thankless work. But not all of the Baumeister victims had been identified. And it really, really bothered me. There was no memorial to them anywhere, and there only has been one since last year, in fact. They'd essentially been allowed to drop through the cracks, which is what had happened to them in life as well. They were members
Hmm.
of the gay community during the early to mid 90s, a time when they were heavily ostracized and on the margins of society. And so it seemed to me like they were ostracized, murdered, and then the insult continued afterwards because
Right.
apart from their families, nobody was keeping their name alive. Nobody had told the story of how they'd fallen afoul of this predator. Um, it just wasn't being talked about, and that didn't sit well with me at all.
Okay. Yeah, and that is kind of sad because they, throughout the documentary, they have family members that are trying to find their lost loved ones that they know they're probably there, but you just need that confirmation and that closure, and to know that like at some point they did get remains back in the day, but it'd be just like a couple teeth and a jawbone and maybe a femur. I mean, to know that that's how he just discarded human beings. It's just very shocking to know he got away with it for so long. I mean, prior to him even obtaining Fox Hollow Farm, he was traveling back and forth for business between Ohio and Indiana, I think it was. And
Yeah, and
there were,
It's when, as you know, when a serial killer is identified, the authorities start looking at missing persons reports or unsolved
Mhm.
murders within the vicinity, and they quickly piece together that the I-70 stranglings were along that corridor which Herb Baumeister traveled for business. And most damningly, I think they stopped shortly before he purchased Fox Hollow Farm, which became,
Mhm.
a safe space for him to continue murdering, that he didn't have to do these on travels anymore. So, the evidence pointing to Baumeister was damning, but we also have to remember that this was pre-internet. So, now when somebody goes missing, it's easy to get the word out, and there are cameras everywhere and things of that nature. Back then,
Mhm.
you literally could disappear from the face of the earth, especially if you were part of a subculture where nobody was keeping tabs on you, where you were already marginalized.
Mhm. Now, where is Herb's family? Because he's a family man. He's married. He has
Mhm.
children. How
Yeah,
is he like keeping these two separate lives apart? Because they're all living in the same house.
they are. But Herb's wife and kids would regularly go to Lake Wawasee, where they would stay in a lake house. So
Okay.
he would wait until they went for the weekend, and that's when he would put on this false persona. He would call himself Brian Smart, and he would go into Indianapolis and hit the gay bars there as Brian Smart. And he knew he would have the house to himself for the weekend. So his MO
Okay.
was to approach men that seemed, firstly, that, took his fancy, but preferably ones that were vulnerable in terms of maybe they were couch surfing, maybe they didn't have necessarily a family that they were living with. And he would tell them the story that he had, was working in a house that had a pool in the basement, and he had some drugs, he had some alcohol, and hey, why don't you come on back and party? Which is a pretty good offer. If you're in a
Mhm.
nightclub, chances are that's kind of what you're looking for. And
Right.
so he would drive them back to Fox Hollow Farm, and he had already prepared the scene. So the swimming pool, he had set the heat up to high temperature and covered it, which I always imagine as being like a saucepan on the range simmering, with a lid on top. And then
Oh.
when he got back, he would take the pool cover back and then open the French doors. There are 3 sets of sliding French doors. He would let the cool night air in. That would hit the warm water from the pool, and you would get steam. So
Okay.
you have this disorienting environment in the pool. And, then you add to that the surreal nature of all of the mannequins that were around the pool dressed
Yeah.
for a beach party. And his victims kind of were exposed to this environment where presumably, we can't say for sure, but we are told um, that they were intoxicated, given intoxicants, things of that nature, all of which would have made them more easily controllable by Herb, because he was
Mhm.
not an overpowerer. He was a very slight man in terms of his physical build.
Right.
There's no way he would have physically been able to overpower many of these men on equal terms.
Right, right. And that's like the weird thing too, like the way he was and lived, like he had all these mannequins dressed up and where he was disposing these bodies and to have his family with his children and his wife there and they just don't feel like that kind of behavior was odd. I mean, to me, you would think as a wife, you'd be like, what's going on here? And supposedly there were like burn piles and stuff. Didn't she see what was on her property? I mean, because it seemed like it was right by the house. Or the pool
Well,
house, at least.
towards the end, prior to his identification, Herb and Julie Baumeister, their marriage was breaking up. Um,
Okay.
and so they were kind of living separately inside the house anyway. He was living in they called it the mother in law annex, which is kind of bolted on at the side of the house. So they were leading semi separate lives. Um,
Okay.
and my suspicion is, I mean, you and I both know your husband, Dave. If Dave
Mhm.
starts acting strangely or stranger than usual for Dave, I know the bar's set pretty high.
Yeah,
Um,
where's the line for that?
yeah, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if he starts acting oddly, your first thought is probably not going to be, I'll bet Dave is out there picking up men, bringing them home and murdering them, right? I mean, it's just
Right.
not going to be on your radar. So
Uh-huh.
I, there have been varying claims about how much Julie did or didn't know, and I can't speak to that. She did go on Oprah to tell her side of the story after her Baumeister. But I mean, I don't know. Red flags are one thing, but who really suspects their spouse is out there murdering people?
Right.
It would take a lot. The big the big red flag, and what ultimately got her caught, was that their son was out in the woods behind the farm and found a skull, a human skull, and brought it back to the house. And like any brother does, if you have a little sister, he put it on like a broom handle and raised it up to her bedroom window. And of course, that's comedy gold when you're a kid, right? The screams, the pandemonium. So, the story goes that she said, "Well, where did you find that?" And he said, "Well, it's in the trees behind the house. There's a whole bunch of other bones back there." That's the point at which most people, I think, reasonably would start to raise eyebrows. She did confront Herb when he came home, and he claimed that it was his dad's skeleton. And what I mean by that is his father had been a fairly well-respected doctor.
Yeah.
And so Herb had said that it was his skeleton from medical school and that he just tossed it out into the woods. And it seems that she accepted that explanation.
Oh, well, I would have been like, okay, well, then we're going to go clean the rest of it up because I don't want our kids playing with it.
Yeah. And then, yeah, it is surprising to me that the game wasn't up as soon as, because when the police certainly went into those woods, they found bones everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, maybe she was trying to, disconnect from the whole her Baumeister thing, like leading a separate life. Maybe she was just kind of like didn't want to acknowledge it, because if she did it, then it's real,
Maybe.
But like, what do you do when your kid comes up with a human skull and the innocence of them? Just putting on I didn't mean to laugh. I know that's a horrible thing, but it's
Yeah,
just
but anyone with a little sister finds that funny, right? I mean, we're not diminishing the victims at all. That's what you do when you're a sibling. That's what siblings do.
Exactly.
So, but it is surprising that that wasn't the end of it right there.
Right. Okay. And his behavior even kind of continued to be weird. There was that one news clip of him, and I'll play the news clip. But I guess apparently he was driving home with his son in the car, and he sees one of the trucks that paints the lines onto the road, and he sees a dead raccoon or a possum in the road. And he's like, tells his son, they're going to paint right over it. And he goes, sure enough, they did. So apparently it was good enough for a news story. And the poor, the rodent that was, or the roadkill that was in the road, yes, did have the yellow stripe painted over it. And he thought that was so cruel. So cruel. Meanwhile, behind his shoulder is a pile of human remains on his property.
The Indiana Department of Transportation maintains over 11,000 miles of roadway, and we paint those miles of roadway each year, and this is just an isolated incident that happened.
The drive-by striping, whatever.
Herb Baumeister of Carmel saw it all.
I said to my son, they're gonna hit that raccoon with a spray gun, and sure enough, they just striped right over its face and neck. Didn't even move it, no effort to, get it out of the way. So I happened to have a Polaroid with me, so I took a shot at the thing.
A raccoon, which met its demise on the yellow line, became one with the paint. The raccoon has since been removed. This is all that's left.
This was just, the painter should have had a chalk line drawn around his career by state officials. There was no excuse for that. I mean, the poor thing deserved a better fate than that.
But, there's a couple of ways you can look at that, Winnie. I mean, one is that it was Herb basically laughing at everybody, hey, I'm making such a mountain out of this molehill, and if you had any idea what I've done. There are those serial killers that just really get off on that whole hiding in plain sight. It's the same reason that, arsonists like to visit the scene of a fire. It's the same reason that criminals like, say, Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, like to taunt, hiding in plain sight. So, I mean, I find that to be a pretty compelling argument. The alternative, or maybe there is a degree of both at work, is that he's so dehumanized his victims that he genuinely felt more compassion for a flat animal, a dead animal, than he did for human beings that he had, murdered himself.
Oh, maybe
You
because
know?
he's like that. He
Yeah.
didn't deserve that. He deserved better than that. And
Yeah.
granted, it was horrible. I mean, come on, if you see that, you can move it out of the road. You don't have to paint over it.
Right, but
But
it's also not. I mean, who calls the local news for that?
right,
But also, if you think about it a little bit more, if you know that you have this evidence in your backyard, who on earth brings a camera crew in on intentionally? Why do
right,
you do that? It's like, stay the hell away from my house. I don't want any attention at all. Instead, he
right.
deliberately courts attention. He brings the media to his murder residence. Why?
hmm No, it's that cat and mouse. Yeah, he's like said chase that being on the edge of getting caught, and
Mhm.
they kind of thrive on that too. I mean, it's
Some do,
probably
yeah.
a different high for them
Mhm.
than killing, but it's that walking that thin line of just almost getting caught and stuff. I can totally understand. Well, we got to take a quick break, but when we come back, a new character pops up into this picture. And now the coroner, his name escapes me right now, but he's trying to like reopen this, because he
Mhm.
feels that these victims are people and they need to be with their families, they need to be known, they need to be,
Mhm.
found. So he's trying to gather, these DNA profiles to start matching people up with family members. But this other paranormal investigative team called Paranormal Consequences, they were coming in to do some paranormal research, and a gentleman came up. So we were going to talk about him when we come back from the break.
Are you feeling lost, stressed, wondering if Mercury is ruining your life again or the universe is just ghosting you? Well, you're not alone. At Love and Lotus Tarot, I keep it real. No crystal balls, no woohoo, just honest, grounded guidance to help you navigate life's chaos. Whether you need clarity on love, career, or just anything that feels like a mess, I've got you. Here's something really cool. In between tarot sessions with me, I just put out this new journal book, your very own purge journal. Don't hang on to all that angst and all that stress and all that anger. Get rid of it. Whether it's valid or not, you still have that emotion just eating away at you. So purge them onto paper, scream it, shout it, get it out. They're available right now on Amazon. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description below. Or just visit me at lovelotustarot.com and purchase your purge journal there. Visit lovelotustarot.com to book a reading, check out some of the new merch, and find the insight you've been searching for. Because let's be honest, therapy is expensive and my cards are way cooler anyways. So head on over to lovelotustarot.com now and let's figure out this thing called life together.
Okay, we're back from the break. Now, before the break, we kind of alluded that another character kind of popped up when it came to this paranormal investigative team. I believe this his name is Mark Goodyear. So can you
Mhm.
kind of elaborate kind of how he came into the picture and what was his reasoning for, kind of inserting himself into the story?
So Mark's story has changed over the years. He's told different versions to different people. And if you read
Uh-huh.
my book, you won't see the name Mark Goodyear in there. He goes by Tony Harris because he
Okay.
insisted on anonymity and a pseudonym in order to have his testimony shared. Um, so one version of the story is that he is the victim that got away. And that's the version that he told initially, and went to the police and said that he had gone home with Herb Baumeister, or Brian Smart, as he knew Herb then, his pseudonym, and that he'd been attacked by Herb, had fought him off, and had been the victim that survived and was able to get away, which a lot of people found to be suspicious. Um,
hmm
he then came forward and said, well, I actually slept with him and didn't get attacked. And I just told the police that I was attacked in order to bring law enforcement attention to Fox Hollow Farm. So that was his next version. He's told variations on those stories several times, multiple times. But yeah, his real name is Mark Goodyear, and he is maddening in that he's the only primary source that we have for what went on inside that house actually during the time of the murders. Because of course, you know, Julie Baumeister, Herb's wife, was not present at the time. Herb Baumeister is dead. The question that many people have is, for how much of it was Mark present? Was he an accomplice? Was he a hero? Was he? You can't deny that he brought the case to the light, to the attention of the authorities. I mean, he did. So that alone is meritorious. Could he have done it sooner? Should he have done it sooner? Was he privy to more than he's saying? Mark, I spent a day with Mark at Fox Hollow Farm, in the woods as well. And he's a man that loves to be the center of attention. He loves to tell stories. And he outright told me, you'll never know when I'm telling you the truth and when I'm not, which for any kind of researcher is the most maddening thing, when your only source is outright telling you, you know, you can't trust everything I say. And I do wonder now, having changed the narrative and told different stories for many years, I wonder how much in his mind he actually knows, because we all know that when you tell a narrative over and over again, you change it, you start to believe it yourself. You start to, you know, anyone that tells stories, which is all of us, we kind of color them to make it more interesting or to make ourselves look better. We leave certain details out sometimes. I think that what he remembers now is not necessarily what actually happened either.
Right. And yeah, because it seems like, it seems every time he gives a little piece of some truth or whatever he's giving up, it always changes to something a little bit grander. And then it's just like this build, you know, because eventually he's like, yeah, I was in a relationship with him for 2 years. And he's like, yeah, we would go to the gay bars together and I would try and pick people up to bring them home. And, you know, I would tell everybody at the bar, don't go home with him. He'll kill you. But then you're going home with him. I mean, how are people supposed to take you seriously when you're part of this whole thing?
There are witnesses that claim that, you know, Mark Goodyear jumped on a table and yelled, don't go home with that man, he's a killer. Like that's something we have actual objective testimony on. And, you know, I know that we focus primarily on your show here about crime, but, you know, Mark Goodyear claimed to me that the ghost of Herb Baumeister came home with him and still resides with him. He says anyone that tells you they see Herb at Fox Hollow Farm is lying or delusional, because he came home, he left with me. So, you know, it's a real complex, convoluted web at which he is at the center.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I'm wondering if he's ever had any type of paranormal investigation done at his place to see, or
No,
if he's
not that I'm
looking
aware.
himself. Wow. And you know, and that's another reason why I like these kind of cases, because I like to go on, me being an empath, I like to go on these locations and see what I pick up on. I'm amazed of how much emotion is still left at these locations. And to know, you know, piecing those together and placing, even though it's paranormal, putting that in together with some of the facts, and when they correlate, it's pretty remarkable when that happens. So Mark Goodyear, okay, yeah, he says he's the one that got away, and then he eventually changed his story that he actually had a relationship. Now, now he wanted to keep, you know, be anonymous, not show his face. What made him change his mind, and all of a sudden now he's in this documentary talking about all this?
That's a great question, isn't it? Again, you know, I wrote the book 7 years ago, I think it was, with Rob. Back then, you know, he wanted anonymity, and he'd done one paranormal show where he had them film him from the back, so you see the back of his head. To go from that to stepping into the spotlight, the reason he states in the show, as I'm sure you remember, is, you know, he said, well, I want to know what people think of me. Am I the evil accomplice? Am I the villain, or what am I? quite what has brought on that change of heart, I do not know. I haven't spoken to Mark in a few years, and the last time I heard from him was that he told me that he had a strong impression that I should never return to Fox Hollow Farm again. It was borderline threatening, actually. It's the way I took it. It was almost like a veiled threat.
Yeah, and now there was a report that was given talking about how Mark Goodyear was like he was the one that people needed to watch out for.
Mhm.
And they were concerned of him stalking. I mean, who was he caught doing any of these type of activities?
I am not aware of that, so I can't speak to it. Couldn't tell you.
Okay.
But again, Mark is an interesting character.
hmm
When you look at his actual actions, because there is so much speculation, and if you followed any of the social media commentary on this case, a lot of people are just literally saying, guilty, like
hmm
the court of public opinion has judged Mark guilty. He has never been even considered a person of interest, let alone charged with anything, with any crime. But I do think, having watched the show, Mark did himself no favors with the way he answered some questions.
Right. And knowing that, I mean, when technically, if you're at a location and you're watching people being murdered and you
You're an
do
accomplice.
nothing, you're an
If,
accomplice.
if you stand by and watch and do not report, you are not technically, you are an accomplice. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't
So,
understand why they couldn't just get him on that charge, but maybe it's because they can't prove that he was there. But
well, he didn't say that he witnessed any murders, remember?
I swear he was saying he did because he was talking about how he loved or how he would. Didn't he say he liked to watch? He would watch her watch others lose. Like,
He chooses his words very carefully.
oh,
And
okay.
so there's this mix of like what Herb told him versus when I was in there as a paranormal investigator, and this is something that hasn't really been talked about, but I asked him that question outright. I said, Mark, you sure know a lot about the murders. And he just
hmm
smiled at me. He has this smile. And he said, yeah. He said, well, the ghosts of Fox Hollow Farm talked to me. And he told me some of this information was coming to him from ghosts of victims that had not yet even been discovered. And he said, and I'm definitely going to tell you this, aren't I? The ghosts are telling me this, because if not, I'd sure know a lot about the murders for someone who wasn't there. And that would make me look pretty bad, wouldn't it? I mean, that was a
Oh.
direct, yeah, absolutely. So the problem that you have with that then is, we already know that Mark is a proven liar. And what, I'm going to walk into a police station and tell them that, the ghosts are telling Mark Goodyear, who's telling me about, no one was willing to listen. No one was going to believe it. So to this day, it's interesting that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people now have strong opinions about what happened at Fox Hollow Farm, people that have never actually been there. I don't know
Right.
what happened, and I have spent time there. Rob Graves doesn't know what happened either. Um, we are so quick to be certain about these kind of things. It's such a tangled web, Winnie. I just don't know what to believe. And we can only pick it apart one thread at a time and see where each thread leads.
Right. And I feel with all these tangents and this web, I mean, if you listen to how Mark Goodyear tells the story, he's the one that's making the web of this.
I mean,
There's
he
so much
enjoys being at the center
direction.
of that web. Yeah, he
Right.
loves holding court. When
hmm
I met him, I definitely felt this kind of vibe of like Clarice meets Dr. Lecter for the first time. He would
Yes.
he would do some very interesting things. He would just kind of raise his voice, and he would come forward like this, and I think a lot of it was designed to be impactful to me as
hmm
an interviewer. And But I spent the day with him there at Fox Hollow. It was gracious of him to share his perspective. Then I just did not know, and still do not know, what to believe. He told me some very garish, ghoulish, and frankly fanciful stories about things that he said had happened at Fox Hollow Farm involving cults and ritual murder and things of that nature, stuff for which I could find no evidence at all. So as a writer, it's immensely frustrating when you can't trust your primary source.
Right. And then of course this source is he's kind of helping identify, kind of get the ball rolling as well. I mean, even though he may be an accomplice, with him coming forward has helped open this up to reopen, not reopen the case, but like this continue to get these victims identified. But now is he directly still working with any type of law enforcement or the coroner to help identify, or is he kind of just shut down, or I don't know, is he still involved?
I don't know, honestly, Winnie. I haven't heard that he's involved. I am hearing that rumblings about the case perhaps being reopened, but I don't know for sure. I know that Jeff Jellison, I believe, is the coroner, is pushing very hard, and I commend him for it, for trying to continue to identify these remains, because it's not glamorous work, but it's very important work, and it has just been allowed to sit undone for decades. So he really has picked that up and run with it. It's a fact that hundreds of people have come forward to offer DNA samples since the show first aired, and that is aiding the identification process significantly. So I really, really love the fact that names are finally being put to some of those poor men after all this time. I think that if nothing else comes out of this whole thing, that is the single most important aspect. The focus needs to be on those men.
Right, that they're not forgotten, that
Yeah.
us as humans, we didn't give up. We kept pushing, and that's good. And yeah, like the coroner commended that kind of work, that kind of dedication, doing the right thing and getting these people identified. Now, well, let's kind of switch to a little bit more lighter side of things. I don't know how light you can get at Fox Hollow, but talk about Rob and his wife. How did they come across the property? And did they know anything about the property prior to purchasing it?
Well, Rob and his wife, they call themselves horse people.
Okay.
In other words, they were looking for a place that had stables and enough land that they could, trot their horses. And Fox Hollow had stables and was 18 acres at the time. So it seemed ideal, and the price was right. And of course, the price was right because of the history of the property. So when the realtor made it clear to them that, what Fox Hollow Farm's history was, they asked themselves, are we okay living here? Are we okay? And they were. And Rob's an interesting cat in many ways, not least in that he's totally unfazed by the fact that so many men died in his house, or and on the woods behind. And Rob was very clear to me. He's like, yeah, I don't believe in ghosts and all this kind of ghost stuff. His wife Vicky does. She has a background in the medical sciences. She's very pragmatic, very educated, very smart lady. And I don't know what her stance on ghosts was before, but when she saw the apparition of a man with no legs on her own property, she kind of had no choice but to believe then, So
Right.
Rob has not seen any apparitions. He's had what he'll tell you are strange experiences, but to this day, I'm not convinced he believes in ghosts. But Vicky definitely does.
Okay. So it's kind of got that duality in the household. He's more about the crime aspect of it, and she's starting to believe in the paranormal. Now, so once he found out about the property, did he just kind of go from 0 to 60 and just kind of threw himself into researching the property, researching her Baumeister, and all those kind of things that were tied to there?
He So once they moved in, I mean, to know that something like that has taken place in your home,
Right.
I think people would take one of two paths. One is, I don't want to know a thing, and then the other is, I want to know everything, right?
Yeah.
And so he went down the I want to know everything road. So I mean, it's important to note that, like, he bathes in her Baumeister's bathtub, showers in his shower, cooks in his kitchen. Like, a lot of Herb's stuff was left in the library. There were handwritten notes in books of Herb Baumeister's at Fox Hollow that I saw. And so I think that Rob just wanted to understand as much of the case as possible, because he lived with it every day. He lived with what happens, and still does, within the walls of his home. So newspaper clippings, news articles, he went
Mhm.
all out. And he has a very comprehensive library of Fox Hollow related material.
Yeah, and I thought that was very interesting. How like all of a sudden it's just, and that would probably be me. I'd be the same way. I'd be like, I
Mhm.
gotta know everything right now. And now he kept the house pretty much the same. He didn't really do any renovations or anything like that, correct?
No, not majorly. I mean, like, he's tailored a few things, but the pool looks, apart from the absence of mannequins, the pool looks pretty much the same. The wet bar looks very similar. I will say that there is a lot more lawn now on the back. So one of the questions about how Herb Baumeister kind of disposed of the bodies is, how far did he drag them in plain sight? Well, if you look at pictures of Fox Hollow from Baumeister's tenancy, you see that the trees in the back come right up to the back doors. Well,
Right.
now that's hundreds of feet of landscape lawn. It's way more open at the back than it was then. So, people will talk about Baumeister dragging bodies hundreds of feet into the trees. He did not have to go hundreds of feet for them to be kind of concealed. He had to go about 15 feet, which is
Right.
significantly different. So, yeah, but the house remains largely as it did back then for the most part, certainly structurally. It's a
Okay.
very expensive house to run. I know that because Rob told me what it costs to get it re-roofed is about the same as it costs to buy my house. So I have a lot
Oh
of
my gosh.
sympathy for that. Yeah, and I do believe he sold off half the land for property development. So now the acreage of Fox Hollow Farm itself is about half what it was back in the 90s.
Wow. Now, did he find anything? I mean, aside from the evidence found outside with the human remains, was there anything in the house that he found that kind of like
Yeah, I mean,
alluded to any type of nefarious activities he was doing?
one of the things which continues to amaze me, and also Rob highlighted this, is that the method of strangulation, we were told, was with the pool hose.
Okay.
Now, the pool hose is still there. It's the original one. It's hanging on the wall in the pool. So I couldn't believe that wasn't taken into evidence. But it
Right.
wasn't. So, Rob said, yeah, this is almost certainly the hose that Herb Baumeister used for some, if not all, of those strangulations. And it just sits there coiled, hanging on the wall. And that struck me as a little odd. Um, the house had been looted in between tenants when it was standing empty. So a bunch of stuff had been
Oh,
taken and turned up on, I think it was murderauction.com or something like that, on a website. And
okay.
Rob actually bought some of it back, which raised a
Oh,
few eyebrows. But yeah, mostly it's pretty much the same as it was.
wow. Yeah, I think they mentioned it in the docuseries. There was like some type of faucet handles, and
Hmm.
he found a pair on that, yeah, murder auction.
Yeah,
And he actually found out it's the actual handles from his house
yeah,
that he was trying to replace. And
mhm,
like, and it's like, how that would just suck to have to do that. But like,
yeah.
what can you do? You can't say give that back. That's stolen property. you know. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for coming on. Yeah, and this thing is probably going to have some more information and more things possibly coming out. Who knows? We might get a whole new series. But yeah, the Smart Goodyear guy, he kind of he's rubbing a lot of people the wrong way, and I'm hoping that more is shed to light because honestly, I think if he's talking about him as detailed as he is, even though he wasn't there, he's an accomplice. And I feel like justice, somebody should be serving time for this. Somebody. And right now, he's kind of like the next spoke on the wheel that kind of might be it. I don't know. But well, thank you so much, Richard. And you have a website as well. What is that website?
Yeah, you can find me at richardestep.net.
Okay, perfect. I will have The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm, Unraveling the History and Hauntings of a Serial Killer's Home, written by you and the current owner of Fox Hollow Farms, Robert Graves. I'll have a link for that in today's description along with your website. Now, the Fox Hollow Farm murders remain one of the most chilling unsolved cases in American true crime history. And Mark Goodyear's involvement only adds another layer of mystery to this whole saga. Now, he claims to be a survivor, raised important questions, was merely a lucky escapee, or does he hold a deeper knowledge of what truly happened there on the property? Now, as investigators continue to identify these victims and uncover new details, the legacy of Herb Baumeister crime lingers, leaving families searching for closure, and the public is hungry for some answers. Now, while the Hulu docuseries sheds light on the case, many questions remain. How many victims were there? Will DNA evidence and the technology finally bring all of them to justice? And most importantly, who else might know more than they're willing to admit? The official count stands around 25, but thousands of unidentified phone fragments are still yet to be analyzed. And the actual number could be way higher. Did Herb Baumeister act alone, or did he have an accomplice or two? I mean, some theories suggest that he may have had one or two people helping him, whether knowingly or through the silence of those who may have suspected his crimes but failed to speak out. Then there's the lingering mystery of this Mark Goodyear. If his claims are true, how did he escape when so many others did not? What did he see that night? And why has his story changed over time? Now, could his testimony, however inconsistent, hold the key of unlocking further details about the Baumeister methods and his victims? Beyond the crime itself, Fox Hollow Farm remains kind of this symbol of unanswered, terror and horror. I mean, it's a place where families will seek justice for their missing loved ones, but it's also become an estate that's infamous for not only the gruesome things that happen there, but now for the alleged paranormal activity that has taken place, with visitors and new homeowners reporting ghostly encounters and eerie experiences, as if the spirits of Baumeister's victims are still crying out for recognition. Now, as the investigation continues, DNA technology may finally give names to the unknown remains, offering closure to those left in limbo for decades. Now, however, with Baumeister, before he could ever get, be held accountable for this, some truth may have died with him. Now, leaving the question of Fox Hollow Farm's full story forever shrouded in mystery. Will we ever know everything that happened there? Or will the horror of Baumeister's crime remain buried, just like his victims, who are still wait to be found?
And tonight, the cremated remains of two men are now resting at a new memorial for the victims of the Fox Hollow Farm suspected serial killer.
This is the memorial that we first told you about last week. Well, today it was dedicated with the names of 9 identified victims, and now their families do have some closure in this case that dates back 30 years.
This monument marks the final resting place for the innocent souls who lost their lives at Fox Hollow Farm.
The limestone monument dedicated Thursday at Hamilton Memorial Park Cemetery in Westfield, just 4 miles from the Fox Hollow Farm estate, where Herb Baumeister is believed to have killed a still unknown number of men more than 30 years ago. The cremated remains of Jeff Jones and Alan Livingston were placed in the ground at the memorial donated by He Knows Your Name Ministry.
Honoring victims and their family is finishing a story. It's bringing beauty from ashes. But please hear me say that doing this today does not undo the horror of this tragedy.
I still felt a sense of it being surreal. And because it's such a large case and such a wild situation, but to actually see this today brings something that's less surreal and brings some realness to it. And I'd rather the realness come during a time of light and peace as opposed to the tragedy.
The names of 9 men are on this memorial, but 10,000 remains have been recovered at Fox Hollow. The hope is that this memorial will bring more families forward and perhaps lead to more identifications.
To those families that may be waiting to have a loved one identified, You've been grieving in a darkness for 30 years of unanswered questions. Please understand we also see your grief and that we are working diligently to provide you with a path of closure.
And a permanent place where these men are no longer forgotten.
As of January 2024, forensic experts continue working in an effort to identify nearly 10,000 portions of human remains covered from an unknown number of victims at Fox Hollow Farm. We want to remember those who have been lost for over 30 years. And the victims that have been identified are John Lee Bear, age 20, went missing on May 28, 1993. Jeffrey Allen Jones, age 31, went missing on July 6, 1993. Richard Douglas Hamilton Jr., age 20, went missing on July 31, 1993. Alan Lee Livingston, age 27, also went missing on August 6, 1993. His remains were recovered in the initial search on the farm in 1996, but remained unidentified until October 2023. Stephen Hale, age 28, went missing on April 1, 1994. Alan Wayne Broussard, age 28, went missing on June 6, 1994. Roger Allen Goodlett, age 33, went missing on July 22, 1994. Michael Frederick Kern, age 45, last seen on March 31, 1995. And finally, Manuel Resendez, age 34, last seen at the Gay Bar in downtown Indianapolis on August 6, 1993. In January of 2024, Hamilton County Coroner Jeff Jellison announced the identification of his remains that were recovered in 1996 from Fox Hollow Farm. Human remains recovered from the property match a family reference sample that was submitted in early 2023, which led to the identification. I would like to give a special thank you to Hamilton County Coroner Jeff Jellison and cold case investigator Steve Ainsworth for dedicating their time and efforts to get these victims identified and back with their families where they belong. It takes a lot of courage to do a job like that, and not anybody can do this job. So it takes special people like you guys to get it done right. And I also want to thank Richard for shedding light on such a dark part of our history and how we can learn from that. So that way, if something comes up like that again in the future, we can access that type of case better, have a better understanding, and make sure that the victims and the families are reunited and not have such this void for over 30 years of not knowing. And another thing too I'd like to bring up is this GEDmatch.com. One thing that is great about this, and I'm not affiliated with them, but if you would like to help out or put your DNA in a database, GEDmatch.com, it's free to join. If you already have a DNA profile from like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, you can upload those raw DNA results into there, and it will build a profile for you and connect you with possible family members as well, along with they are starting to use this as a tool to identify Jane Does, John Does that they have in the morgues. So it's always a great thing to have on, have something even if you want to help, with cases like Fox Hollow Farm. People actually have been coming out of the woodwork donating, well, not really donating, it's not like donating blood, but donating or taking the time to give their DNA results in, just in case if possibly there might be a connection to somebody's remains on that property. So with that being said, thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please reach out to me and visit me at mysteriesmayhemandmerlot.net. Check out my merch, check out my books and more. And hey, reach out to me, email me at mysteriesmayhemandmerlot@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.